Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their craft and more. My name is Edith and joining me from across the pond is author Julie Brill. Hello, Julie, and welcome to Book Lovers Companion.
Hi, Edith. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here today.
Thank you for being here. And we are going to talk about the book you have written about the memoirs of your family, especially your father's memoir. And the book is called Hidden in Plain Sight. I would say give our listeners a little bit of an insight what the book is about, a little bit about your journey before we dive into more questions.
Sure. So my father was born in Belgrade, Yugoslavia in 1938. So he was a very young child, not even 3 when the war broke out. I grew up outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and I heard over and over again these stories of the war and the Holocaust and what he lived through, but I never could understand what they meant or how they fit into the historical record. We never learned anything about the Holocaust in Serbia. And so I set out on this sort of midlife journey to figure out what happened to my family and what the larger story is, what happened to the Jews of Belgrade. And originally it was just sort of me writing for my family. But as I learned more and more and I realized that this story had really not been told before, at least in English, it became another thing. It became me trying to tell the story of the Jews of Serbia because there were so few survivors and descendants of the Holocaust left to tell the story. It really felt like it fell to me. And so that's the book. It's my father and I becoming closer and learning our family history. I kind of passed it up to him. Usually parents pass their history down to their children, and I got what the Nazis stole from us and passed it up to him. We went to Belgrade several times with my children, and this is the book that tells that story. Yeah.
The book is interesting in 2 ways, not just your father's story, his childhood in Serbia during the Second World War, but also the fact that this was a journey for you in discovering your more extended family's past, your grandmother's past, which you weren't aware of. And I got the impression that also your father wasn't exactly consciously aware of.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny how you can know and not know something at the same time. Um, I think that was true for my father. It was definitely true for me in the way that I think family secrets often are. So they're not said out loud and we don't know them. And yet we know even as kids sometimes things don't make sense. There's a piece here that's rough that doesn't fit into the puzzle. And this searching for wanting to know, well, what really happened and what really makes sense. I didn't really set out to write like a family secret memoir, but it kind of is. And so many people have read the book now. It's been out for 3 months. And they feel like since they know my family secrets, they're going to share mine. It turns out everybody's family share theirs. So it turns out everybody's family has secrets. So I've learned like all of these other people's family secrets in the process, all kinds of things. But I do think there's some drive to figure out, what really happened and what makes sense and what's the truth.
And also what made sense for you, because what you wrote was also a sort of homecoming story, wasn't it, for
Yes.
you in a way, if one might say so?
I feel that so strongly. I talk about going back to Serbia, even though I had never been there. We were so warmly welcomed. I don't speak Serbian, but I just felt at home there. We came through the Nikola Tesla airport. We think of him as an American immigrant, but he's, an immigrant from Yugoslavia. And I think there's just such a strong history of people leaving and coming back and a Serbian diaspora. We came through the airport and my father's place of birth, as we said, is Belgrade. And the passport attendant said, welcome home. And from there, everybody just sort of took us in, whether we were related to them or knew them or not. And I felt like we looked like them, like we just, we ate foods that we ate at home. It was so unexpectedly fulfilling to come back to Serbia.
Mm, And may I ask, this research for this book before you put it on paper, how long did it take you? I mean, you touched a little bit
Yes.
on it in the book, but for our listeners, how long were you so, immersed in the research before you felt safe enough to write or to start writing?
Yes, I love that question. So the flip answer is like since I was 3 years old, since my dad started telling me these stories, and I would listen so hard and ask him a question and try to fit it into another different story because he was so young. The memories he had are like these flashbulb memories. It's just a moment in time, and you don't really know anything else around it. And so I was like listening. He was like the child that he had been talking to the child that I was. So the research started in the early 70s, but really it started in 2017 when my younger daughter went to college and I had sort of an empty house and the time and space to do the research. I had always tried to kind of keep a wall between me and the Holocaust when the kids were little. They knew the story of our family a little bit, and they knew, of course, the general history of the Holocaust, but I was always trying to protect them because I had been thrown into it myself as a child. But when my younger daughter left for school and there was time and space, and I just sat down with the internet and it started to research, the book came out this year. So it was complete in 2022. So it's really that 5-year period where I was just sort of living and breathing it all the time. So yeah, it's intense. It's intense history to live with.
Absolutely. And getting all the information you needed, writing to museums and hoping that they have some materials regarding your
Yes.
family. How hard
Yes.
was that sitting in front of your computer and waiting for an answer?
Yeah. I mean, so what really started it was I sent an email to the Jewish Museum in Belgrade, which is the museum for all of the countries of the former Yugoslavia, with really no expectations, and got this treasure trove of documents, birth certificates dating back to the 1800s for my family, this link, and my father was the last one, born in 1938. My aunt was born during the occupation, so of course she has no birth certificate, and you could just see like the family laid out. That was a gift that really helped me know that there was more information. I think I thought, we learn history in school, it's complete, we know what there is to know, and that's it. And what I've learned, of course, is the past is never over. We're learning more all the time. So there are archives that weren't available to the public even 10 years ago that now you can draw from. So that has been really amazing. I've learned about Brills that I'm worried about. I don't know who they are or how they fit into the tree, but I've tried to research them because I don't think they have descendants. I don't think anyone else is coming to look for them. So it has been really just an emotional journey.
Yeah, also an interesting journey finding out all these little tidbits about your family, your grandmother and her family, and how far back it goes according to your
Yes.
records, and also where did it come from? Because you discovered links to Germany.
Yes. Yes.
What we call in German, you said Donauschwaben, which
Oh, that's
means
not a word I know. Volksdeutsch, right? Is it?
yeah, no. Volksdeutsche is also an expression that
Okay.
was mainly used by the Nazis. But you mentioned in your book, Danube, what did you
Yeah.
call it?
Yes. Yes.
And the German
Right.
word is Donauschwaben, exactly. And you said, yeah, they settled in Romania and former Yugoslavia, and it's a bit
Yes.
like what happened to people from Austria, from the Austrian Empire, who were Protestants, for example, because they were forced to leave Austria and were settled in, for example, Romania.
So fascinating. So the way we learn European history in the United States is there were people in Europe and they came here. We don't learn any of this like migration, right? Of course, there are groups of people historically moving all over the
Yeah.
continent. We just don't learn it. So it was shocking to me. But yes,
Yeah.
my grandmother converted to marry my grandfather. It's a love story. They met in a dance hall. She was dating a soldier. She dumped him for for my grandfather. And the way it worked in Serbia, because the Serbian church was so patriarchal, was that you could intermarry, and always the woman would convert. It didn't matter what the religions were. And so my grandmother converted. I never knew that. I always wondered, but I never knew until I started getting documents. And her mother was a native German speaker. Part of this community that you're referring to that sailed down the Danube in wooden boats and built their houses out of the wooden boats and lived there for 400 years and held on to their Catholicism and held on to their language and their culture. And that's really part of how my father was able to survive. That was the cover that he was hiding under.
In plain sight, like you said in your
Plain
book,
sight.
because they could say, for example, well, he's not Jewish. I'm Christian, therefore my grandson.
Right. Exactly. And my great grandmother was both collaborating or working with the partisans. She was storing weapons for them in the barn, and they were coming at night to get them. My father saw that. But there were also German officers on the property during the day riding her horses. They would pay her to do that. So she was like somehow a foot in each world.
Interesting and dangerous game, actually.
Yes. I think she had no choice.
Yeah. And I mean, what a courageous woman. That is brave.
Yeah.
Because if you set one foot wrong or say something wrong.
Right. It was all over for all of them. She and my grandmother somehow managed to make my father feel safe. So when I would ask him as a kid, but how did you survive? I don't understand. He would say, my mother and my grandmother wouldn't let anything bad happen to me, which of course nobody had that power against the Germans, but they made him feel safe. And that was such a gift for him. That's why he grew up to be the man he is. Yeah.
An all-female household. Do you think that's also, in a way, how he was as a father? Because what he experienced through your grandmother and your great-grandmother growing up without a father figure, a direct father figure. Of course, there are always father figures out there, one way or another. But growing up in an all-female household does shape your personality, does it not?
I think it has to. I mean, my father had a couple of uncles, his father's brothers, who survived the war, and eventually they all went to Israel together. So he did have a little bit of that paternal, I think, influence. But yeah, I mean, he thinks women can do anything, right? Like he saw it. And my grandmother, too, who took them to Israel in 1948 and just sort of like made a way out of no way. I mean, those were the models for him when he was growing up.
Yeah, strong women. They had to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, my father also grew up without a father because he died in the Second World War. There was also no father figure, but my grandmother's brothers who survived the war. Yeah, so it's a bit the same way, but not the same because we aren't Jewish, so we can't compare this. But growing up without a direct father figure.
Right.
Is something.
I mean, almost a whole generation, right, of these little boys without their dads.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And yet they did grow up quite all right, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, we're resilient, right? People can do a lot of things if they have enough love and enough, support.
Exactly. I mean, what can I say? Gen X. You are 1970, I'm 1975, so.
Yes, here we are.
Best generation.
We think so.
Yes, definitely. Not just we think so. Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say was the biggest surprise for you during your research, during writing this book?
I mean, so many things. So we already shared the secret. That was a big surprise. Being welcomed back to Serbia was a big surprise. Feeling that there was still more past to uncover. We found a lot of family members that I just thought everyone had been murdered. At one point, we're in the Jewish cemetery. My father had always said that his great-grandfather was doctor to the king. We don't have kings. So that sounded like this fairy tale, like were there dragons there? Like what else? And we went to the cemetery, the Sephardic cemetery in Belgrade, where this forefather, Dr. Bernard Brill, is buried. And of course, it says on the tombstone, the whole thing, he was the doctor to the king. And my daughter went around the side, and there was another image on the side of the grave for this Dr. Simon Brill. And we didn't know who he was, but he turned out to be my grandfather's first cousin, and they were born a year apart. They were like best friends. And we had just lost that whole part of the family tree. So like discovering these other people was really important. It turns out that Simon's sister survived the war, and there are living family members in Croatia and the UK who we've met. So that like returning not just history, but family has been just very emotional and powerful.
I can imagine. And you said it's not just your father's past, it's the past of a whole community you tried to put on paper, because there's not so much in the literature about the
Yes.
Serbian Jewish community. And can you tell our listeners a little bit how it differed? How does the fate of this community differed, for example, from the fate of the community, let's say, Germany or Austria?
Right, right. So, growing up, I learned the Holocaust history mostly just in Hebrew school. We didn't really have it in the public schools yet, but we learned Germany, we learned Austria, as you said, Poland, Anne Frank in Amsterdam, and that was kind of it. And that history is very different. So, in Belgrade, the war comes very early, and the Holocaust is right along with it. So, the Germans invade Belgrade, where my family was living, in April 1941. And within 2 weeks, they're registering the Jewish men, including my grandfather. We have the paperwork for that, and assigning them jobs as slave laborers. And one of the stories my father always told was his father was doing this work. He had to report every day, but he came home at night. And we had learned this Holocaust of cattle cars and faraway camps. And so, like, he came home at night. It never made any sense. And I could see it now in the historical record from April to August. That's what happened. They didn't have camps. The men went home. My grandfather came home to his wife, my grandmother, and to my dad. And that went on until around my father's third birthday in August 1941. And then there's a camp. And my father remembers that. So my grandmother was screaming and wailing. She was pregnant with my aunt, and she didn't know what had happened to him. And of course, I'm sure she thought he had been killed. And he was now being held in this camp in the city. We talk a lot about who knew what, and did the civilians know what was happening, what the Germans were doing. But in Belgrade, it's 100% they knew. The Germans were showing them. So the camp was in this capital city in Belgrade, and there was nothing in the camp. There wasn't food. There weren't supplies. There's a letter. They're begging for straw so the men don't have to sleep on the ground. And the Jewish men that were enslaved there were dependent on their female relatives for food. And so my grandmother went and brought my grandfather food. That was another family story, how like a Holocaust, history where you could visit a camp. That wasn't something we had learned. But in Belgrade and in much of Eastern Europe, the Holocaust was very close to home. So after the men were murdered in this camp, they set up another camp just across the Danube for women and children. It was all very local, and it was all over by the spring of 1942. They were saying Belgrade was Judenfrei. So that's just a different story. Because it was so complete, it really hadn't been told. So Timothy Schneider, the historian, talks about the Auschwitz paradox. Auschwitz, terrible place. Over 1 million Jews are murdered. It's a terrible death camp with gas chambers. It's also work camps. And so tens of thousands of young Jewish men and women survive. They're like in their teens and 20s at liberation. And so they go on, many of them, to tell their stories for a generation or two. We know the story of Auschwitz. In Eastern Europe, where there are so few survivors, it's 90% of Jews murdered in Belgrade, for example. You don't have that same survivor population to tell the story. And in fact, there's what they call the missing, which is 1 million Jews who were murdered who don't have names recorded because no one came looking for them. If you murder a whole village,
Mm.
you just lose everything. And those are the stories we don't know. I hope
Yeah.
more of them are going to come to the surface, but this is one of them. This is the story in Belgrade.
Well, probably hard to discover, but I mean, to say that this sounds a bit flippant, but aren't we glad that the Germans were such good record keepers
I
in a
mean,
way?
that's the irony, right? One of the things I learned through the records in German was the date that my grandfather was murdered.
Yeah.
So in Judaism, we do what's called a yahrzeit. You remember a person, usually a family member, when they have died on the Hebrew calendar on that date when it comes around again, and there's prayers and a candle. And we didn't have a date. And now we do. My grandmother never knew the date. In fact, she sort of held out hope that he was alive all those years.
Yeah.
But we have a date now, and that's the German records. Lists. We found a list of the Jews reporting for labor. My grandfather's on that list. His neighbors are on that list. My grandfather's checked off. Some of them, there's no check,
Yeah.
And then you're like, were they killed? Did they escape?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many rabbit holes to go down and follow these German lists and see what happened to individual people.
Do you think there's still a possibility of records stowed away in Russia? Because it was
I think,
also
yes.
hard to get the hands on the Russian archives.
I have no doubt that there's more information, both like official records that are going to show up and just letters. And I have another friend who is also the daughter of survivors, and she recently had the experience where their family home was torn down and they found records in the wall and found her. So yes, I think there always will be the possibility for more information.
And what about Belgrade itself? I mean, are there, I suppose there are, like also here in Austria, are there still a lot of older buildings? Because sometimes it happens that people find, artifacts from the
Exactly.
19th century even. Might that also be possible, do you think?
I think it could be. Our family home was torn down. The Jewish neighborhood in Belgrade, Dorchel, which isn't a Jewish neighborhood anymore, or it's a Jewish neighborhood without Jews, is right in the city center. It's valuable real estate now. So our family home is gone, but certainly there are many buildings that are still standing that might yield information. Yeah. It's interesting when you walk down the street in Belgrade, it's a mix of old and new buildings. And they say it makes sense if you look at it from the air. It's the strips that the Germans bombed.
Yeah.
So from the air, you can see why there's new buildings and old buildings where they are, but not from the street.
Yeah. Can imagine. I mean, I suppose it's a bit the same everywhere in the big cities that were bombed, not just only by the Germans, but also by the Allied troops.
I think that's right. Belgrade is the only city that was bombed by both.
Yeah.
The Germans bombed it and then the Allies bombed it. Yeah.
And an even harder question which came to mind reading your book is, since the Balkan was such a prominent center of what happened during the Second World War, not just, Central Europe, but also the Balkans. And what people often forget is that there was also this fascist regime in the neighboring country of Croatia. So did you get any information in so far how the Nazis and the Ustasha worked together in getting rid of the Jewish communities?
Yes. So I don't know a super amount about Croatia. What happened as soon as the Germans came in, they divided Yugoslavia. And so there really was no Yugoslavia from 41 to 45.
Yeah.
And Croatia went back to being the country of Croatia, as you said, and was ruled by these fascist Croatians. And there was a large camp there where Jews were murdered, but also Serbs were murdered there. I haven't looked a lot at that history because it is a very different history. It really depended on where you are. But I will say that when Serbians want to talk about Holocaust history, that's the history they want to talk about. What happened in Croatia, it's much easier than what actually happened, in Serbia proper.
Yeah, because probably you do not want to take a too close a look at your own actions, maybe also.
It's very complicated. There was a lot of resistance in Serbia. As I mentioned, that's one of the reasons why that camp was right in the center, and partisans were very active, and also a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's complicated. Yeah.
Oh, it's a complicated history in the Balkans, isn't it? I mean, and it all came back in the 90s.
Yes.
Tragically.
Yeah. Yes.
There's also, again, the question of religion, isn't there? Again, and again, because the Serbs are Orthodox, Christian Orthodox, where the Croatians are Catholics. Then you have the Muslim population and the Jewish part of the population. So,
Right, exactly. It's very complicated. People were able to live together until they kind of weren't. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes you wonder how it was possible. I mean, again, without being flippant, do you think that Tito had a large part of keeping it all under wraps?
Yes. I mean, I think Yugoslavia really couldn't exist without him, right? I mean, we saw that it was, there was so much that he did to move populations around and encourage intermarriage and discourage conversations about ethnicity or religion that sort of, I think, was just the will of his personality until he wasn't there anymore. There's a street. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go on.
There's a street right off the neighborhood where my family lived, and there's a Orthodox church, a Catholic church, a mosque, and a synagogue. And you just see there's the possibility that people could be neighbors and friends in the right circumstance.
If they are left alone without outside forces.
Right.
Because isn't that also a big problem, and wasn't it a big problem in the past? Because other people have, interests, and they put a lot of money into a country because it furthers their agenda.
Definitely. Yeah. We're looking at you, the United States. I mean, Yugoslavia was created in part because Woodrow Wilson thought it would be a good idea. I mean, there's a lot of outside influence.
Yeah, and then even to this day, when you look at parts of former Yugoslavia like Bosnia, how the influence of Middle Eastern money changes the face of the religion.
Yes.
I dare say. And you wrote in your book that your family wasn't that overly religious, as far as you can remember. Of course, the important holidays and so on, like you all do. I mean, there is this expression we have in Christianity, Taufscheinkrist, if you know what I mean. You are baptized, and you go to funerals and weddings, and otherwise,
Yeah.
But researching the past of your family, did you also learn more about your religion?
Yes, very much so. So it turns out that in addition to being Ashkenazi, which is the Yiddish-speaking Jews, with German origins, my family is also Sephardic, the Jews that were expelled from Spain and Portugal in 1492, which I had no idea, which is just my own naivete and my mother. We just couldn't imagine that we weren't just what we thought we are. I mean, my mother is 100% Ashkenazi, but that my father had this other roots. But if you know the history, Belgrade was predominantly a Sephardic community. The first Ladino press, historically Sephardic Jews spoke Ladino, which is a kind of Spanish. The first Ladino press was in Belgrade. The majority of the community was Ladino in the Jewish quarter. And then in the 1800s, an Ashkenazi community came in, but they stayed very separate. So they had their own synagogues and schools and cemeteries. One of the things I learned is that my great-grandparents were a mixed marriage, Ashkenazi and Sephardic. He was Ashkenazi and she was Sephardic. That doesn't happen. So there's sort of no explanation for that. It was an arranged marriage. She was a teenager from another city. They brought her in and they were married. And I assume that she was quite religious. She died before my father was born, so we don't know a lot about her, unfortunately. But there is this other part. And so we went to the Sephardic cemetery to see family. That's the major cemetery in Belgrade. And it's different than what I had grown up with. They put pictures on the graves, which is wonderful. Like you walk down the rows and you kind of get a sense of who people are just looking at their faces. So that was just sort of another layer to uncover.
Oh, interesting. And what about these other parts of your family, learning about the Christian part, which is also again a mix of Catholic and then Orthodox?
Yes.
How did that feel to you, learning a bit more about this other parts, this other religious part of your family?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I have a degree in sociology, so I've always been interested in religion, like from a cultural perspective. I know a fair amount about Catholicism just because there's a large Catholic population where I live. It was very interesting to find out those were my roots too. And it certainly made me feel more rooted in Serbia. Like, I think Jews often have a feeling like, oh, we're not from anywhere. We're just kind of wandering around. But like, the Serbian side, oh, we really are rooted here, which just, made me feel even more connected to the country. My father told me that my grandfather considered himself to be a Serb first. The expression is something like a Serb of Moses's religion. And so that also made me feel just like much more rooted in Belgrade.
Mhm. Interesting point of view. Your nationality, more or less,
Yeah,
ethnicity, nationality before your religion.
right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And what about Israel? His mother brought him and his sister to Israel after the war. Was there no sense of home in Israel for him?
Oh, no, for my father, very much he identifies as Israeli, and he was
Mm,
in the
okay.
IDF, and
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
went to school there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't say for my grandmother, I never got to know her. She died
Mm,
in her sleep of a heart
mm,
condition
yeah.
before I was born, as quite a young woman.
Yeah.
Um, but she was done with Europe, and when we went to the camp where my grandfather was held, which is now just like an overgrown yard with a couple of falling down buildings. It's not a monument, but we stood on the street and it's so obvious something was there. And I imagined, during the war, people in Belgrade walked back and forth. They went to work, they went home, they went to see a friend, they went to play soccer. They just were living their lives walking by that camp. And I imagine my grandmother seeing that. And I started to understand how she could leave her own family and her own community and her culture. She just turned her
Mhm.
back on Europe and she left a capital city. I mean, it was recovering from World War II, but what she went to in Israel, much less developed and at war with its neighbors. And she stayed because I think she just couldn't face Europe anymore.
Mhm. Understandable. I always wonder about the strength of people who came back after the war.
Yeah,
You know, it's because some of them said, "Yeah, well, it is my home, no matter what.
right,
I'm, for example, Austrian or I'm German, and therefore, I've always wondered why. Because,
right.
like they said, it's my home after all. Again, a certain strength on
Yeah, I mean,
their part.
yeah. I mean, I think to stay or to go, I think those were
Yeah.
hard choices after the war. My grandmother renounced any property she had. She renounced citizenship for herself and her kids, and they went, with nothing. They lived at first in tents, it was very
Mm,
primitive. I think she thought she didn't have another choice.
mm, mm. And how was it for you? How did it feel? I mean, like I said, you describe it in your book, but it is still something how to describe it. What do you feel when talking to someone is still different when you tell me when you met your family in
Yeah.
Serbia? How did that feel?
So warm. I mean, the Serbs are so warm. There's this like triple cheek kissing, left, right, left, like you're just like all hugging. I mean, just like, my dad's cousins met us at the airport. I mean, it just felt so warm. I think, which is just, I think it's genuine. And I think it's also the community, just that's
Mm,
the culture. I
mm,
remember standing at the street at one point, there were a couple of teenage boys just like standing around touching each other. Like, we don't see that in the US. Like, they're just friends. They just like each other, like all that warmth just needs to go somewhere.
mm.
It was just a very meaningful experience. And we went back and we went back again, and I hope my book will come out in Serbian and I'll be able to go back again. It's just
Yeah.
I feel very drawn.
Oh. Will it come out in Serbian? Do you have a translator?
We'll see, we're maybe. That's the hope. I would really like I
Mhm.
would like it to be in many languages, but Serbian is of course, the most important.
Yeah, understandable. I mean, yeah, and the audience for the rest of Europe also can do with English, so I wouldn't worry too much
Exactly.
about that. Well, I could do with
I hope so.
English, so yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
yeah, it's
Especially,
available on
yeah,
Amazon.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Especially the younger generation,
Right.
they can do. What would you say is important? You said at the beginning of our conversation that the American school system, well, didn't teach too much about, migration, or especially not Europe. Yeah, well, migration from, let's say, the Mayflower to the United States. Oh,
We got that
was
part.
or the colonies, let's call it that, because it wasn't the
Yeah,
United States back then. But that's
right.
it, and everywhere else, not so much. And also, mm, maybe more a bit about the whole wild world. Is
Uh-huh.
that your hope?
I mean, I've always been interested in history. I think history is so important. I know every teacher teaching every subject thinks it's important, but yes, more history from the perspective of people on the ground, not the kings and the generals. I mean, we really need that feeling like
Mm,
we are living history, we are shaping history, what we do makes a
mm,
difference. Looking at individuals in the past in difficult situations and
yeah,
what choices they made, I think is a really important way to look at history. Um, More European history, more world history. Honestly, more indigenous history in the United States. We don't get that either. We get one perspective. I do hope that it's better now, but there's a long way to go. I
mm.
think that's really important, not just for the sake of learning what happened, but for children growing up to be adults making decisions in the world.
Well, yeah, especially when you listen to, I don't know, to short videos and on social media and so on, when people get asked these days, I mean, it's a bit like, what? What are you talking
Right.
about? I mean, you have never experienced a fascistic or totalitarian regime. What are you talking about? But
Yeah.
neither have I. But it is covered in history lessons in school, and thank goodness I haven't
Right. That's right.
experienced it myself. Why would I wish for that?
Right. Right.
Because people think it something bad would never happen to them.
Right.
Seriously, do
Right.
you really believe that? How naive are you?
Right. Right. It's very scary, and these are very scary times.
I mean,
What's gonna happen next?
one can only shake your head. I mean, what makes you wonder? Did those
Yeah.
people learn nothing?
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah. Or
not.
they learned something else on TikTok that overrode it. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, if yeah, exactly. If TikTok is your source of knowledge, you should be
Right.
worried.
Yeah.
I mean, also comparing yourself to Julius Caesar, like I said before, to someone else. Do you know what happened on the Ides of March?
Right. Right.
In case you don't, maybe you should look it up.
Yeah. History is very important.
Yeah. And what about these mm, other memoirs or real stories of people? Are they taught in school? Like, for example, Anne Frank's diary. Are these part of the curriculum?
I mean, so the way it works in the US, right, we have 50 states and every state does
Yeah.
their own thing, and then school districts sometimes do different things. People know, a lot of people read Anne Frank
Mm.
and learn that. I mean, there's so much to learn about history, but Anne Frank is an important part of the Holocaust, but she is such a unusual part of the
Yeah,
Holocaust. It's not a
yeah,
typical story.
yeah.
I volunteer in high schools sharing my family story, and often
Mhm.
they'll get one book. That's the book on the Holocaust. I mean, they spend a month on World War II and a day on 2 or 3 on the Holocaust. And Anne Frank is often one of those books.
Mm,
Diary of a Young Girl. Night is another one that a lot of
mhm,
people read. Elie Wiesel.
mhm,
It's hard, there to be representational with one book or 2 books.
mm. Yeah, exactly. And everyday life, I mean, when I read your book and when I thought about our conversation before I came on, and I remembered Viktor Klemperer's diaries. He was married. We probably know him. He was a
Say it again?
Viktor Klemperer. He was a German. He was a German Jew. He was a university professor, and he was married to a non-Jewish woman, and she refused to leave him. And there was a large group of people, Jewish people, who were married to non-Jewish partners, and they refused to leave the Jewish partners, and there was a lot of commotion, and the Nazis more or less backed down, and they were moved from their house to sort of camps and so on. Not um like Auschwitz or something, but they had to work in factories and so on, and they were uh put together in, like, say, community living things. And he had a diary, and they made a TV show a few years back, and it was very interesting to watch, because that's also something a lot of people don't know about, because if you stood by, you could more or less beat the regime,
Right,
because
right,
what they abhorred was publicity. Don't be loud.
right,
just
right,
just accept your fate.
right.
And they hated nothing more than, people who wouldn't accept their fate, and
Yes.
who would demonstrate and said, no, we don't do what you want us to do. And he survived the war because, like I said, his wife stood by him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting story.
Yeah.
Look at the
But
TV show.
yeah, I'm not sure if you can watch it in English, but it was in German. German television produced it a few years ago,
Okay.
and it was fascinating to watch. But you also, I'm sure his diaries are translated into English. I'm quite certain of that.
I'm gonna look for that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also an important part here in Europe, and it's part of the school curriculum to talk about the Second World War ad nauseam. Especially, I say ad nauseam because it's always about battles and whatnot.
Right.
Yes, we
Yes.
have them.
Yeah.
We have them in the Middle Ages. We have them in the antiquity. Yeah, what about the everyday life? Yeah, like you said,
Right.
everyday life of people. What was it like
Right.
for
And these acts
them?
of resistance that you're talking about, which can be
Yes,
really inspiring. Be an upstander, don't just be a bystander. Those are the stories we need to learn.
yes, exactly. Those who wouldn't give in.
Right.
We seldom hear about them. We maybe hear about them when they make a film out of someone special. But what about the little bits? What about the little bits of resistance?
Right.
Everyday resistance, for example. Nothing major, but for example, in the western part of Austria, people resisted resisted by not saying Heil Hitler,
Yeah.
but by saying Grüß Gott.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to
Well,
know more about that, you know?
hmm? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, this is teeny tiny, but still
Right.
a way of showing those in power, I do not agree with you.
Right.
And what about the rest of the people who feel they are not brave enough? Because that's something I've often wondered, and I've often talked about with friends and so on. I'm not sure what I would have done. I mean,
Right.
70 years later, it's easy to say, I would have been brave and I would have done this and that. I don't know.
Right.
To be
I
to
feel the
be
same
honest,
way.
I don't know.
Right. Right. I don't think you can know. You're not just putting yourself at risk, you're putting your family at risk. I don't think anyone can say with certainty what they would do.
Yeah. Would you try to hide, put down your head,
Yeah.
and hope to stay alive?
Yeah. Right.
I don't know.
I feel the
Julie,
same way. Yeah.
when will you come to Europe again and Serbia? What have you planned for another visit?
So no plans. I would love to come next year. If the book is out in Serbia, I will definitely come next year. I mean, I'll go anywhere, honestly, to talk about the book and share this family story and the story of the Jews of Serbia. I would come to Austria. Edith, I'll go anywhere. Just sharing the story.
And you have published it as an indie author.
I'm with a publisher called
Okay.
Amsterdam Publishers.
Okay.
She just publishes Holocaust books, so survivor stories, second generation, third generation, mostly memoir and history. There are some fiction. I was so happy to find her and connect with Lisbeth, so I kept sending the manuscript out and getting this feedback. Great story, well written. There's Holocaust fatigue. Nobody wants another Holocaust story. And all she does is Holocaust stories. So that was a really good match.
And maybe in the future, do you think you might turn parts of your family history into fiction? Have you thought about that?
When I first started writing, I very much wanted to fictionalize it. I think every memoirist has this moment where maybe I could just fictionalize it and no one will know it's me. It was very important for me, though, to tell this story in a way that was clearly fact. In the book, if I don't know for sure, I might hypothesize, but I'm always clear that I'm, wondering. I don't know what actually happened. I didn't want to fictionalize it because I wanted the true story to be out there.
Mm-hmm. And is there more to come about your family's past? Because this is so much you have discovered, and so little time in a book, because there's absolutely room for more.
I think there will be more writing. I mean, I'm still living the story, so more things are happening. And as the book comes out, people have reached out to me with similar family histories. We're probably all cousins because there was so much intermarriage. There could be articles about that. I've written a lot of essays, and there might be an essay. I don't think there's another whole book coming out. I put my heart and soul in this one.
Well, who knows? Because it would be interesting. To learn more about this other part of your family.
Yeah, I could write a book about that. My mother's family is interesting.
Yep.
I don't know.
Absolutely.
A book is like a baby. It's a lot of work.
Especially those books fiction is always a lot of work, especially if you do historic fiction, but also non-fiction that's about history. I mean, the facts you brought in your book, which are not part of your immediate family history, how much time did you invest researching and getting your facts straight?
Yes. Years, and double checking and triple checking and asking, an expert to read it. And there's so much more research that didn't go into the book because I just didn't want to overwhelm the reader. That was maybe the most time consuming part of the whole thing, was the research.
The research, I suppose, and the editing?
Yes, many rounds of editing. The first draft would kind of pour out. I had thought about what I was going to write, and I would sit down and write it, but the editing is so tedious. And, you're really at the point where you're moving commas around and, yeah.
And how did you decide? You just said, of course, like with every other historic fiction or non-fiction book, there's so much that doesn't go into the book. How did you decide, or did you have help to decide what to leave out without being too overwhelming?
I did. I had editors who really helped me. I mean, the guiding light was, does the reader need to know this to understand the story? And if they don't, it went out. And I was always like, but this is about a real person. Like, I want this information to be out in the world. No, it's not part of the main storyline. And that was like outside perspective very much helping me, because I wanted to just kitchen sink it, just put everything in. But I think it's good. In the end, it's very tight. There isn't anything in there that the reader doesn't really need.
And was your father the first person to read the finished manuscript?
Both my parents and my brother, and I also have 2 grown daughters who are in the book.
Yeah.
And they read it at multiple points. Partly because I didn't want to say anything that wasn't true. Everybody remembers things a little bit differently, or anything they didn't want to be in, but also because it was generative. They would be like, "Oh, but also this other thing happened on that day," and I would like, "Oh, right," and we would, put that in. So it was very much a back and forth. They're all in this book very much. A lot of people are. There was a lot of hands and eyes on this book to get it where it is.
Yeah, understandable. Julie, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
I mean, Edith, I'm so happy that you took the time to read the book, and this is really one of the best interviews I've done. Ask me these questions. I just appreciate your helping me get the story out of the Jews of Serbia and helping to share my family story. If people want to connect with me, my website is just my name, juliebrill.com. There's links to other things I've written and videos and where to buy the book. And if anybody reads the book and wants to share a story, it's been just part of the process. This back and forth with readers has been very rewarding. So thank you. Just thank you very much.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making time for me.
Of course. Yes.
Julie,
yes.
Thanks again for being here. Wait for me in the green room. I will be with you shortly.
Okay.
Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guests and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I do hope you will tune in for another episode. Until next time.